According to the Federal Trade Commission, identity theft is the #1 crime committed against American consumers. Frank Abagnale, whose years as a con man were depicted in the film Catch Me If You Can, has been a consultant to the FBI for over 4 decades. Abagnale will tell his incredible life story and share his insight and expertise as a world-renowned expert on the subject of identity theft and cybercrimes. Stay tuned for Stealing Your Life with Frank Abagnale next.
Funding for this program has been provided in part by the Iowa Insurance Division and its Iowa Fraud Fighters program, offering resources to protect Iowans from investment fraud, consumer scams, and Medicare fraud. Learn more at iowafraudfighters.gov.
Good evening. Thank you very much for coming out this evening from your busy schedule. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. As you know, I've had a lot of people tell my story. Had a great writer write a book about my life, had a great film director make a movie about my life, had a great Broadway musical team make a Tony Award-winning Broadway musical about my life, and of course a popular television show on TV for 4 years, White Collar, created around my life. Most of those very creative people have actually never met me personally, but they've enjoyed telling my story from their point of view, so I thought I would take a few minutes tonight to actually tell you the story from my point of view. I was raised just north of New York City in Westchester County, New York, in a little town called Bronxville. I was actually one of 4 children in the family, the so-called middle child of the 4. I was educated by the Christian Brothers of Ireland at a private Catholic school called Iona in New Rochelle, New York, where I went to school from kindergarten to high school. By the time I had reached the age of 16 in the 10th grade, my parents, after 22 years of marriage one day, decided to get a divorce. Unlike most divorces where the children were usually the first to know, my parents were very good about keeping that a secret. I remember being in the 10th grade when the father walked in the classroom one afternoon and asked a brother to excuse me from class. When I came out in the hallway, the father handed me my books and told me that one of the brothers would drive me to the county seat in White Plains, New York, where I would meet my parents and they would explain what was going on. When I arrived in the lobby, my parents were not there, but I was ushered into the back of an immense courtroom where my parents were standing before a judge. I couldn't hear what the judge was saying, nor my parents' response, but eventually the judge saw me at the back of the room and he motioned me to approach the bench. I walked up to stand in between my parents. I remember distinctly that the judge never looked at me and never acknowledged I was standing there. He just read from his papers and said that my parents were getting a divorce. And because I was 16 years of age, I would need to tell the court which parent I chose to live with. I started to cry, so I ran out of the courtroom. The judge called for a 10-minute recess, but by the time my parents got outside, I was gone. My mother never saw me again for about 7 years until I was a young adult. Contrary to the movie, my father never saw me or ever spoke to me again. Back in the 1960s, running away was a very popular thing for young people. A lot of them got caught up in Haight-Ashbury, the hippie scene, the drug scene. Instead, I took a few belongings from my home, packed them in a bag, boarded what was then the New Haven and Hartford Railroad for the short train ride down to Grand Central Terminal in New York. My father did own a stationery store, but actually in Manhattan, located on the corner of 40th and Madison. Like all of us, we had to work in that store, so from the time I was about 13, I made deliveries for my dad on a bicycle during the summer. I knew the city very well, so obviously I started looking for the same type of work. There were a lot of signs in the window: stock boy, delivery boy, part-time. I'd walk in and apply. So tell me, young man, how old are you? 16. How far did you go in high school? 10th grade. I'll hire you. And I went to work for a small amount of money, a few hours a day, but I soon realized I couldn't support myself on that amount of money. I also realized that as long as people believed I was 16 years old, they weren't going to pay me any more money. So I decided to lie about my age. In New York, we had a driver's license at 16. Back then, it didn't have a photo on it, just an IBM card. So I altered 1 digit of my date of birth. I was actually born in April of 1948, but I dropped the 4, converted it to a 3, and that made me 10 years older, or 26 years old. I walked around applying for the same type of work. People gave me a little more money, a few more hours, but even then it was very difficult to make ends meet. One of the few things I had taken when I left home was a checkbook. My father had opened a checking account for me at a small community bank in Mount Vernon, New York, had a little money in that account. So every so often I'd write a check to supplement my income, $20, $25, funds were there, checks were good. But it was my friends, my peers, who would constantly say to me, you know, you're the only guy I know walks into a bank in the middle of Manhattan. You have no account there. You don't know a soul. You talk to somebody behind a desk and they okay your check. My checks are good. Oh, when I walked in that bank, they wouldn't touch my check. You walk in, they don't bat an eye. Years later, reporters would write and speculate and say that that was my upbringing, mannerisms, dress, appearance, speech. Whatever it was very easy to do, so consequently, when the money ran out, I kept writing those checks. Of course, the checks started to bounce. Police started looking for me as a runaway, so I thought maybe it was a good time to start thinking about leaving New York City.